Okay, guys. Let me get this full screen here. Sorry. Okay, this is a screencast of the photo composition lecture. This goes with the notes page for composition. So your next shooting assignment is called composition. It's basically how you put things in the frame, very similar to elements and principles. So we learned the elements and principles already. It's really about your subject matter and trying to draw the viewer in. So you're going to use composition skills. Basically, I'm picking out elements and principles here, like line and emphasis, things that are really important, most important to photography. And you're going to focus on that for the next digital assignment. I broke them up into 3 categories. These are the different tips and tricks for these 3 categories: point of view, framing, and focal point. The first one is point of view, and there's 4 different point of views that I want you to try out. Point of view has to do with where you are in relation to your subject matter. I just want to check and make sure this is recording. Yeah, okay, sorry. I just wasn't sure that was recording. So the first point of view is bird's eye. So you're going to try a couple shots of bird's eye. The camera is above the subject, pointing down, like you can see here with the boy with the snake. It helps remove clutter from the background. So it shows more of the environment or less of the environment if you are trying to crop out things like that. It gives you, the viewer, a unique view of the subject, like this boy here who's looks like he's washing this bucket. You know, that is a unique view. You wouldn't get to see that if we didn't have a bird's eye view where you were up high pointing down. And then also it has this third effect, and that is to create a psychological effect. So whenever your point of view is pointing down, the person looks weak, powerless, and frightened. And directors of movies do this all the time. So if you've ever seen the movie Matilda, this is a good example. A high angle is used to make the little girl appear weak and scared. So you'll notice this in movies often. The next point of view is worm's eye. So you're on a low point and the camera is pointing up at the subject. Again, it allows you to remove clutter and to show the background in a different view. Like you see this man here, it allows you to include the flag and the building in a way that maybe tells more of a story. It also gives the viewer a unique view of the subject. Here is a picture that a student took of a dandelion, and you can see that they got underneath the dandelion, and that's not a view we normally get to see of a dandelion, so it's really unique. And then again, the last thing that this point of view does is the opposite of bird's eye. Worm's eye creates a feeling that your subject is strong and powerful, like they're a leader. And again, here's Matilda, shot from a low angle, and the judge there is looking down on her, and it makes the audience kind of see it from the girl's perspective and also see how frightening it could be, where the woman looks strong. Here's a couple other examples of just different points of view, the low point of view, and how it can really create a unique effect. The next one is eye level. So in eye level, I always say that I'm not 100% sure I should even have eye level in here. It's what is most common. Most students shoot like this already. When the camera is at the same level as your subject, you can see that it's right level with your subject. It's the most common. It's natural for most people who are new to photography. It's not very dramatic. The subject's sort of neutral, but it can create a feeling that you can relate to the subject. Like this photo, very famous photo here of this Afghan girl looking right in the camera, and she's right at eye level, so you kind of feel like you are talking to her, so it's much more natural. So it's great for landscapes, eye level is, and it's also great for pets or young children, where you get down to their level. Instead of shooting down at them, try shooting at their level, and you might find that you like the photos a little better. The very last point of view in this section is angles. Sometimes it's referred to as Dutch angle. If you were a movie director, they would call it a Dutch angle. It is when the horizon line is tilted. And you can see there this picture here of this girl making a heart with her hands. And if you look at the horizon line and fire out, the kids behind her, that's Plymouth in the background, they almost look like they're sliding down a hill. But they're not. They just tilted the camera to give it this kind of strange disorienting effect. It can actually be kind of creepy too. So down here, you know, the way that the floor is tilted, in addition to the dark colors and the silhouetted person, it just has a really strange effect. So you can try that. You can see here's a movie, Thor, where they used this tilted effect. And, you know, it works for everything. So it's something to give a try and see if you like it. The next one is framing. So framing, there's 4 different types of framing. Framing has to do with what you include inside the frame and what you include out. So inside the frame, when I say frame, I mean what's going to be included in the picture. This is the frame going all the way around the picture, what you're looking at in the back of the screen. So let's look at a couple examples. First, fill your frame. This is so important. Kids don't fill their frame. They don't walk closer. This picture of a dog is really probably how you take pictures of your dog all the time. You include the whole backyard. Instead, fill the frame. I don't need to see the dog's paws. I don't need to even see the top of his ears. Sometimes the best part is the closer part. So get closer to your subject matter. Walk closer. This is a great example. If we went to this garden, I'm sure you all would find lots to take pictures of. But really, if you look in here, there's about 100 different photos. I could come in and I could zoom in on just these 3 little cactus plants. And I could zoom in over here on just this one little cactus. And then maybe these red flowers, I could get the repetition of those red flowers. And I might like these over here, the way they snake through the frame. I can kind of draw, you know, I like how they kind of snake around. And you can see here's a picture that someone took where they filled the frame more. So just basically break up things into little sections and fill the frame with more strong composition. And here's another one where they're showing you far away, getting a little closer, and even closer. And it just gets more dramatic each time. Don't think that fill the frame means that you have to only pick one item. These houses, I would call these fill the frame. They've cut off the top of some of the houses, but the rooftops are what is the emphasis. That's what they were photographing. So they got as close as they possibly could. They couldn't fly closer, and this is as close as they could get. So sometimes filling the frame does not mean one tiny object. All right, the next one is frame within a frame, and that is when you take a frame and you look for it in the environment. So you're including that within your frame. So you're looking for things like windows, like people looking out windows or doors. Notice this one over here on the right does not have to have a top to it to be a frame within a frame. So you're just looking for ways to create an emphasis. This is another way. You could use someone's hands or their arms or anything that you have laying around. Also look for the way that trees make frames. Those are pretty interesting. You just got to start looking around in your environment. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be just objects. Peek through bushes, peek through the tree branches, and they make frames. The next one is macros, and you've already been introduced to this idea. That is that macros mean close-up. So when the subject is small, and the size of the subject in the frame is greater than life size. So whatever real life size is, you're trying to blow it up so big that it is larger than life. So in order to do this, you actually have to zoom in. Usually you'll have to zoom. And you got to be careful when you zoom, because the more you zoom, the more you're going to get the dreaded camera shake. So just remember that. If you're zooming in, watch for camera shake. If you're seeing camera shake pop up, you're going to need to get a tripod or get some more light on that, okay? Because there's a direct relationship between zooming and shutter speed. So just got to watch that. The next one we're going to look at is creating a focal point. It seems like I skipped one. I guess not yet. Not yet. I'm thinking of a different one. Okay. Focal point. Draws your attention to an area and creates a resting place for your eye. That's what a focal point is. And there's 4 things we're going to do to create that resting point and that kind of movement of your eye around the frame. The first one is linear perspective. And you may have done this before in middle school art class, where you had to draw trees or phone poles or something alongside a road, and as it goes back into the distance, and it gives the illusion, that's the word we're looking at, illusion, that you could walk into that picture. In photography, we don't draw, we look for things. So bridges, roads, paths, they give this impression that it goes back into space because they go to what's called a vanishing point. All right, the next, or here's some more examples. Some repeating. Look for, if maybe you go someplace like this that has these repeating pylons here that go back into the distance. Anything that repeats. Gosh, I've even seen some strip malls that do this. Or a path going through the woods sometimes will do that if it's straight back. If it kind of winds back there, it may not give that illusion that you're looking for. The next one is probably one of my favorites, and this is rule of thirds. Rule of thirds it's an asymmetrical composition. So if you think back to Elements and Principles, there was symmetry, which means the right side of the frame and the left side of the frame are identical. And then there's asymmetry, where the right side and the left side are not the same. So this is an asymmetrical, so that means you're going to move things so that things are different from one side of the frame to another. You never put your subject in the middle for rule of thirds. And basically what you do is you divide it into thirds. You divide your picture into thirds. So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So that's horizontally. And then 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 again vertically. And then wherever these lines kind of cross, that is your ideal emphasis, they call that. And you want to put your important objects in those crosshairs, right? Somewhere. And you don't have to, if you have more than one thing that's important, let's say this dog had a little ball that he was playing with, it might be a good idea to put it right here in one of these ideal emphasis areas, and then that would really be strong. But at least one of your objects should be in those ideal emphasis areas. And you can see what it does for your image. It creates movement for your eye. It creates an emphasis. It draws your eye there. It creates a relationship between the subject and the background, especially if there's something important in the background. This is not necessarily a good example of that, but we'll see some in a minute. And then it creates a visual sense of harmony and balance. And a lot of you guys did great with this in your film project. You were able to create some space over to the side, and we call this resting space. We call this just something to create a little bit of harmony over here. A little bit of breathing room is the word I'm looking for. Why does this work? Well, it occurs in nature, it occurs in math and in art. It really follows something called the Fibonacci sequence. If you've ever talked about that in your math class, it's basically where a number is found by adding two numbers before it. And so it's, a golden ratio is another thing that we call in art. And artists have been using it for thousands of years. They've also noticed that this golden ratio here, hurricanes follow this pattern, seashells, plant life, the universe really has this sort of this spiral, and there's a mathematical formula that goes with this spiral. So what's really I find interesting is they did a study on babies, and they showed babies a white rectangle. So you can see just like this, nothing on the rectangle, completely blank, and then they tracked where the babies looked. And after they did a bunch of different, brought in different babies, they noticed that most of them would look in one of these areas. And no, the green was not there. That's just showing you where they did look. And that's how they discovered that this is something innate. It's something that we're born with. So why don't we take advantage? If this is where people are going to look in one of these crosshairs, let's take advantage of it. Let's put things that are important there. And so compose your image using the rule of thirds. Get your subject away from the center of the frame. Place important elements at the intersection. So here you can see they put the bee's eye because that was really important. And again, if there was something else, they might have put a second thing in one of the other spots. But really, you just have to hit one. It works for horizontal and vertical, so don't get hung up on everything has to be horizontal to do this. Flip your camera vertical once in a while. Turn those grid lines on in your camera. That's what they're there for. And another thing to think about is to leave the space in front of your subject matter. So if you're using like a person with this, notice that that the space is sort of here. The guy's sort of looking this way, so the space is in front of. Now here they broke that rule and they put the space behind the B, which is unusual. So you can break some of these rules, but usually if somebody's looking off to the side, you want to put the space in front of the object. Here's another rule for landscapes. Landscapes are a little different with the rule of thirds. You never want to, the rule is, you can see down here, let's start at the bottom sequence of pictures. The middle one, the horizon line, so that's where the sky meets the ground, is right in the middle of the frame. and it's kind of boring. It's not bad per se, but it's hard to decide what's the most important thing. Is the flowers or the sky important? Whereas over here on the left-hand picture, they brought the horizon line really low, and they made the sky the star of the show, and the repetition of those trees. And then here, over on the right, they made the flowers. That's the star of the show, and then it's sort of the co-star in the background are those repeating trees. But they moved the horizon line up. You can see here, same thing. The boat was kind of the most important thing with that green water, so the horizon line goes on the top line. Here, got the clouds, and so they actually wanted to emphasize that, so they brought it down. So lots of things you could do. The only thing is I don't want anybody to ever come in and say, well, I didn't get rule of thirds, because here's a good example of a picture that is very poorly composed. There's too much random junk, this ball and whatever, this guy out here that fell off his windsurfer guy floating in there. You know, the dock out here. I mean, it's just really, and then he's right in the middle. It's just poorly composed. And, you know, the horizon line's kind of in the middle, but not quite. But you can crop this to make it better composed. So boom, you can see again, didn't hit any of those ideal emphasis areas. But here is Photoshop. We cropped it, and now it looks much better compositionally. So really, really, we're able to change the composition just in Photoshop. Now, don't do this on purpose. You want to try to do this in the camera and do as little cropping as possible, but I'm saying if you have to, you can. Again, some other examples of rule of thirds. Okay, next one is selective focus. I would say kids probably like this one the most because they say it really makes their pictures look professional. It's when you use a limited depth of field. So by limited, I really mean shallow depth of field to focus sharply on a specific object in a scene. So while other parts are clearly out of focus. So here the leaf is a great example. It's sharp and the background is it's not just a little out of focus, it's very out of focus. Same with the one with the girl. I mean, I can still tell that it's a girl in the background, but the globe is really the sharp part. So that look is awesome because it creates an emphasis, it draws your eye, it declutters the background without removing it, and it still allows a relationship between the background and the subject. So I can still see that looks like maybe a store or something over here, because it looks like maybe there's a sign. And, you know, the background's not a distraction. If there's a trash can in the back, I can't even tell. But there still looks like a neighborhood, so I feel like there's a bit of a story here. To do this, to get this effect, if you remember correctly, we use a shallow depth of field. We get that using the portrait. Portrait throws the background out of focus. Also, the flower will do that. And then if you have a DSLR, you can use the AV mode, but you'll have to come talk to me and I will help you learn how to use that, okay? Because there's a little bit of tricky points to that. So if you want to know, come on and ask me. Another thing to do if you're trying to do the selective focus, put it in portrait mode and then zoom in. Use your zooms, zoom in, and you're gonna get the really soft focus like this one. All right, if you just get it a little bit out of focus, it really doesn't do what you want it to do. So, and again, when you zoom in, we hold still and you watch it. Make sure you don't have camera shake. If you do, you get a tripod or you get some more light. Okay. All right, a couple more examples of selective focus zooming and also maybe putting it on a tripod to avoid camera shake. Here's a couple extra tips. Watch your background. Ask yourself, does the background relate to the subject? If it doesn't, then move. So here the girl here is, there's cars in the background and the cars have nothing to do with her. This is just supposed to be a nice portrait of her smile. So the cars mean nothing in this photo. So get them out of the photo. So not only did they step to the side where the background was a little more plain, but then they blurred it. Look they went into portrait mode and they zoomed in closer and they blurred it. And they also turned the flash on to flash her face. So much better on the right. Also ask yourself, is it distracting to the subject? So here we got a picture of a flower, and just like the discolored background where it's white and then it's dark and then it's light and then it's dark, that's very distracting. Here you can see not only did they step to the side where it was all dark in the background, all one color at least, but again, they zoomed in and they used the portrait mode so they could really blur that background. So much better, much more interesting to look at. The last one is called leading lines. Kids find this one the most difficult. That leading lines are lines that lead the eye from one point to another. So a lot like movement when we studied elements and principles. And here's a good example of how you could do that with people. You can use their body to pose them, but also look for things in the background. Lines that stop behind them. And they work best when it's out of focus. So again, you'd want to be in portrait mode because you don't want those lines to be too crisp. Then they are distracting. But look for lines that move you around the frame. Sometimes they might just be interesting lines that move you through the frame and lead you kind of around the frame or repeat. And then other times there might be lines that sort of tell a story, like this guy walking out of this church, and it's sort of, you can almost imagine him turning and walking this way or walking straight. So that's a bit of a storytelling feel to it. But look for ways you can pose to people or objects with lines leading up to them. And then you'll start seeing them everywhere. Lots of different lines on the buildings and lines that different edges of shapes make. Even when people look at each other, they create lines. But I will say it works best with people. That's true. So if you don't have a person you can take a portrait of, you'll have to find a really good object that you can take outside and see if you can find something interesting, an old lantern or a suitcase or something that's kind of interesting that you can move around easily. And just look for quiet compositions for this. Things that are really, really simple. So lots of reasons to use composition style. We've talked about all these for all of them. And so your job for this assignment is going to be to take 1 to 2. Actually, you're probably going to need 2 of each of those composition styles. You need 24 total images. So a couple of them you'll want to take 3 or 4. Some of the harder ones like leading lines or rule of thirds, you might want to try several different. And when I say 24, some of them could be very similar. In the end, you're going to have 4 good ones. 4 that you're going to edit, make the color and the contrast better. You're going to crop it to the right size, and you're going to print at least one of those. But you're going to need 4 to turn in. So when I say 24, some of them can be very similar. In this one you zoomed in, in this one you went vertical, in this one you went horizontal. So it's a matter of working the scene, we call it. So trying lots of different things before you get that one shot, then moving on. So 24 should be no problem. You should be able to get 124. Get as many as you can because the more you have to choose from, the better you end up doing in the end. Okay, that was composition shooting assignment.